Everybody. Thank you for coming today. This is going to be kind of an exciting talk for me because we're talking about retrieval augmented generation, which I don't know if everybody's aware, but there's this whole thing about AI that's really been taking off lately. I don't know if you've seen any of the news, but AI is really going to be the next generation of how we build and develop applications. And one of the biggest challenges that we have is we face that issue of how do we make that simple for developers? How do we bring AI to the application space? And what's really interesting is that if you look at all of the challenges that we're seeing in the AI space in general, a lot of them are some of the same challenges we've faced on the infrastructure level, but are being presented now at the application level. So let's talk a little bit about what is RAG, what is retrieval augmented generation, and what are the things that you need to build and bring an application into production. So one of the questions I have for everybody here is this, so how many of you, is this your first reInvent? How many of you have been to a reInvent before? A few of you? Like, this is something like my fourth, fifth, sixth reInvent. And what's interesting, right, is that every single year I know that I'm going to be coming out to reInvent, right after Thanksgiving. And the other thing that is really interesting is that it would be really great if the airlines that I fly frequently knew that as well, and the hotels I stayed at knew that as well also. Because I'm always flying out on Sunday night, I'm always coming in that evening, the hotels I stay at are pretty consistent, and it would be great for the ability for those applications for things like frequent flyer miles and my hotel points knew that I was going to be doing this year over year, and more importantly, could put together packages for me to actually execute on without even having to think about it. And that's really the power of what RAG brings to the table. It's the ability to bring different applications and generative AI into the application space and take all of the data that you have within your infrastructure and use that to generate either things for your end users, application code. It allows you to build those tools and those applications so that they can now generate new functionality without having to have somebody think through what does that mean. Now, there's a lot of different components that are involved in the RAG stack type of approach. When we talk about generative AI, one of the biggest challenges that people are facing is that this space is moving so fast that the tools that are available to people are constantly changing rapidly. And what's available to them is becoming a big challenge. So we need the ability to look at what are the things that we need to build an end-to-end application that's going to be using retrieval augmented generation and generative AI. And there's a couple of core components that we need to look at. One is the actual kind of the infrastructure for memory and the actual ability to put context for large language models. Those are the things like Flare and the tools that are out there that allow you to build those things for those LLMs. You also have orchestration frameworks like LangChain and Llama Index that are being used to orchestrate your data and leverage that data efficiently. And then you also have the issue of how do I embed that data? Because when you look at vector embeddings, one of the big challenges is that if you embed data for a certain type of use case, you can actually see benefits for that use case, but other use cases might have a better way to embed that data. So you might want to take and embed that data in multiple different ways for different applications. And that's what RAG brings to the table, is the ability to leverage data across multiple different applications and to bring your own data to the table for building generative AI applications. The biggest thing that I like to talk about with retrieval augmented generation and the generative AI stack itself is one of the things that you're going to see all over here today is all of the different companies that are in the Gen AI space. If you go to all the booths, every one of them is probably going to talk to you about a chatbot, a natural language processing model to interact with the data. And those are what I would classify as the first step in that kind of dive into generative AI. It's the easiest thing to do, right? It's to bring my data together and build a chatbot that allows me to access that data in a real intrinsic way. But what's really interesting is when you start building around that and start building on top of that idea. when you start looking at how do I use the data that's being used for AI-based applications and generate new functionality beyond just natural language processing and interaction. And that's what RAG brings to the table. It's that cyclical effect of refinement, adding new data to the actual equation, and using that data to help drive context and help drive application decision-making processing. The way I like to look at it, and the way I put it, is that generative AI, things like DALL-E and all of the ChatGPT stuff, is really the first layer. But when we start to look at how do we bring predictive and generative AI functionalities together, that's where the real power is going to start to come from building these generative AI applications. And that's what RAG is ultimately providing, is the ability to take and leverage the data that we're using to make predictive analytics, use that data, generate new functionality, and then feed that back into the system so that we have a conceptual circle that goes through and allows us to continually augment what our users are experiencing and what they're looking for. If you go back to my example of flying out here, what I would love to see is when I come online, say a month ahead of AWS reInvent, if my airline application already said, hey, by the way, this is coming up. We've got a bunch of great deals on flights for you right now that are going to be the best that they can be. Here's a bunch of packages that we've put together for you. Would you like us to book that? One click. Because they know all of the information for me, right? They know everything about me, and they know what my behavior and characteristics are. The other example I gave here is really that aspect of, we're in the heart of Las Vegas, and one of the things that casinos love to do is make sure that you're happy sitting in whatever chair you're sitting in, whether it's playing poker, playing slots. And we've got all of this infrastructure that's been built to provide customers with, hey, when you lose that big hand at blackjack, maybe it would make sense to offer you a free buffet. And we've built an infrastructure of kind of an event-driven architecture that says, hey, when you see this trigger, let's trigger something else to do this type of thing. But what generative AI is going to do is it's going to change that game for the casinos. Because what if I'm not really interested in going to the buffet? What if I have something else from me personally that allows us to event-driven drive my personal experience? And that's where generative AI applications are starting to be put into place, right? It's allowing for us to take this kind of model that we've talked about in the infrastructure, which is an event-driven model for data, and now we're event-driving our actual customer engagements and allowing AI to facilitate that. So how do we do this at DataStax, and what does DataStax bring to the table? And that's really a layer that we like to talk about heavily, because if you go and do any research on generative AI right now, the very first thing that you're going to see is conversations around vector search and vector databases. How do I take all of this data that I need to drive these generative AI processes and use them in those applications? And there are a plethora of different purpose-built vector databases that are on the market today. New ones are popping up daily for different scenarios. And what we provide is the ability to leverage a very proven technology built on Apache Cassandra that allows you to use vector database functionality at high scale, high volume, low latency, and extreme dimensionality for your vector embeddings. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I show you an example of how Astra DB can be used as your vector data store and allow you to store billions of different vectors at high dimensionality and do that and access that in real time at very low latencies. One of the other big benefits that we look at with our Astra DB product is that one of the things that it's designed for is the ability to not just do querying of the data, but to do querying and indexing of the data at the same time. So one of the big things with RAG is that you need the ability for the data to be serviced, both indexing into the database, but also querying out. And so there's a lot of parallel processing that's built into our Astra DB because it's built on Apache Cassandra that allows you to do both indexing and retrieval and querying of that data at rapid scale. The other piece that I like to talk a little bit about is what is beyond the vector database. Because The reality of what we're talking about with retrieval augmented generation is that RAG is an architectural pattern. It's a model that's used for how do we access and integrate all of the different pieces of data for generative AI. So there's not a RAG type of solution, it's an architectural design pattern. And what we've done is made that architectural design pattern easier to access. So with our RAG stacks layer, what we've provided is the ability to get curated generative AI components that are available as an integration layer so that you as an application developer can simply plug in whatever tools you need to build your application. Whether you're using LangChain, Llama Index, or if you're using stuff from Amazon with Bedrock, those functionalities are all built natively into our RAG stacks solution, and we have the ability to integrate with those directly as part of that solution. The other thing that we have as well is the assistance layer. So one of the big announcements coming out of OpenAI last week, other than all of the interesting company situation that's going on, was that the ability to provide very simple assistant APIs that allow you to leverage their performance and leverage them for a processing platform. And so we also have the ability with our assistance APIs, with single line of code, you can then offload all of your processing to something like OpenAI, AWS, or whatever you're looking for. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is, why would somebody look at using somebody like DataStax as a platform for building their AI applications? And I think the reality of that is very manifest in some of the news that we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks, right? This space is moving so fast that you need a layer of integration that allows you to access your data in multiple different components and service that up in a seamless way. You need your application infrastructure to be able to scale both at the database level for access, but also in the development process. So being able to leverage different tools as they're being developed and being deployed. And that's really what our RAG stacks, our Assistance API, and our Astra platform provides for you. So one of the other areas that we're very happy to announce this week is that we have announced basically a full integration with Amazon Bedrock that allows you to increase your generative AI accuracy. If you look at the performance and scalability of our Astra DB platform and our Astra platform itself, it's all designed around how do we provide better accuracy, lower latency, and higher throughput. And so we're bringing that to Amazon Bedrock. We're providing faster to production application deployment, and we're also enabling a series of powerful APIs that allow you to build generative AI applications faster, and more importantly, bring them into production on proven technology. So being able to take a production application, an application that not just has been designed to build a chatbot into your documentation, but something that you're going to be able to put together and service to your customers is really the key goal. Now, one of the things that I wanted to show you is how do we see this in action? And so one of the things that we've done here is this is a demo that we've put together called WikiChat. And WikiChat is all designed around taking Wikipedia, and embedding all of the functionality of that, so hundreds of millions of vectors into our Astra DB product, and providing an interaction with that so that you can chat and you can get feedback and updated information as you're actually interacting with that. So a great example here is if I go and click on the statement here of what happened with Sam Altman at OpenAI, that will service to our backend database, and you're going to see essentially a response back that's coming from Wikipedia. It's giving you a source, and ultimately, what you're going to see as we develop this application more is that there's going to be follow-on conversations that are going to be thrown as well. But what if I want to ask a different question? So I can ask things like, what are some things to do around AWS reInvent, and get information from Wiki directly from that in natural language processing. The key here is that it's not just about the chatbot. What it's about is the ability to take this data and use that data to service your application and allow for an interaction that's more natural and more functional with regards to how things are happening. So I could continue asking these different questions, and I could continue to grow this application and have my application feed back and say, what are some other questions that might be of interest? If I'm talking about what happened in the 2023 Las Vegas F1 race, you might want to service that back and say, hey, what happened on the Thursday night with the time trials and all the people that are suing F1 because they feel like they didn't get their fair share of information and ability to watch that because of the delays that had happened. So that's really the key. So if we look at the kind of as a last layer of things to talk about, one of the things that you have to look at when you're building a generative AI application is what are some of the things that you need. So there's always going to be agents. You're always going to need the ability to search and access your data effectively. You're going to need the ability to search across multiple different modes of operation, right? It's not just about documents, but it's also about things like images and videos. Here at AWS, we're generating so much content that some of it is documents, press releases, things like that from all of the different companies. But more and more, we're seeing a lot of that content being generated in things like images and video processing. So how do you incorporate that into your generative AI application? And it's that multimodal approach. The other thing that we talk about is the ability to enhance content. One of the biggest things that you're seeing with regards to this generative AI push and open ChatGPT, for example, is one of the biggest challenges with ChatGPT was it was limited in scope with how much data was available to it. It was only going up to 2021 with regards to what was available. And so for people who wanted to access newer, more relevant, accurate information, they needed to upgrade to ChatGPT 4 because the data sets were static. But with retrieval augmented generation, we now can take and index new data as it's coming in and train models to be more generic and allow those models to access data more effectively. So as new data is being generated, I can feed that data into my vector store, my vector database, and I can do that in a way that allows for that LLM to continually process and my applications to bring in the most relevant data and allow for better accuracy, less bias, and less hallucinations as part of the process itself. So if we look at what are some of the things that are really important to us as we develop our solution around generative AI and more importantly around building a RAG platform, there's really a couple of things that we really look at. One is that we look at performance. Because if you look at any of the information that you're talking about within your enterprise, if you're going to build a chatbot to interact with like your product documentation, your data set's going to be pretty small. But if you're starting to say, how do I bridge across multiple different products and provide solutions with regards to things like what other products might be of interest, or if I'm building out a whole SKU model for my customer catalog, that's a lot of information. And if I incorporate things like customer engagement, customer preferences, all the metadata that's involved with that, that becomes a very large amount of data that we need to vectorize and provide dimensionality for. And you need a database and a functional platform that allows you to provide high performance, very high throughput, and do so in extreme low latencies. The other thing is that it's got to be able to perform as a workload under test. You've got to be able to show that as I'm adding the information and as I'm retrieving information, that as that workload is flowing, that I need to be able to make sure that that application is responding in real time with whatever backend system or what other customer engagement I'm doing. And so those are really the key pieces that we look at. Where we see ourselves and differentiate ourselves is that we are all about data. And we've been about data for the last 15 years. DataStax has been in the data business for real-time application processing for over 15 years. We're the primary contributors and back for Apache Cassandra. And what we're doing now in the generative AI space is taking all of that experience for developing and deploying production applications and allowing our customers to access that information and use that information to provide generative AI applications in a production-ready quality. Not just for databases, but also for being able to do integration as well as data distribution. And so what we've seen is this 18% more relevant, more accurate information provided, 15 times faster indexing compared to other vector databases and embedding models on the market, and more importantly, 12x the performance for querying that data. So if you've got an application where you're looking at scale, or if you're looking at deploying to a generative AI type of approach, we would love to have more of a conversation around how do you do that. My colleague actually is handing out some cards that we're doing a workshop on RAG in particular to show you how to do this and how easy it is to use Astra. If you're interested in that, she'd be happy to get you a QR code for that. It's actually happening this Thursday, so if you're getting a little bit overwhelmed with the lack of conference material that you're going to, you can take a break and go to a workshop that we're doing. But more importantly, if you're interested in it, we're going to do replay of that data, so you can go back and review that as well. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much. If you have some time and are interested, please stop by our booth. It's booth 112. It's actually just all the way on the other side of the venue, kitty corner, in the other corner of the venue here itself. So thank you very much. That's my time. If you have any questions, I'll be around, and I appreciate all of the information that you have, and I thank you for your time today.